is my pleasure to welcome to the stage Austin Karp. He is from Sports Business Journal, and he will be moderating. And we have Flora Kelly. She is the Vice President of ESPN Research at ESPN. And Cathy Engelbert. She is the Commissioner of the WNBA. Thank you.
Awesome, Dan. Thank you for that introduction. Flora, Cathy, thank you for taking the time to chat this afternoon.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be here, Austin.
Awesome. Let's jump right in. Obviously, women's basketball numbers are taking off, whether that's for the WNBA, whether it's at the college level. We just saw an NCAA championship just shatter prior records. But WNBA also coming off its best regular season in 14 years, its best postseason in 15 years, the best draft since 2004. So, Cathy, I want to go to you first. What are you attributing to the success of these women's basketball numbers at both levels recently?
Well, Austin, thanks so much for having me today. There's so much momentum around the game right now, the women's college game, the WNBA, as you mentioned. We just had our draft right after that Final Four. Our draft was up 42%, the most viewed draft since 2004 when you know who got drafted, the GOAT, Diana Taurasi. So Leah Boston going #1 and so many other great players. And really just such a positive indicator for the interest in this upcoming season. Our 27th, the longest tenured women's professional sports league in the country. And, really the success is exactly what we've been marketing around, these talented, charismatic players who are driving people to watch games, fast-paced, high-scoring game. Last year, a lot of people didn't pay attention to this. We had 9 triple doubles last season. Remember, we only played 40 minutes, not 48. That we had only had 11 in the history, the 25 years before then. We had 9 just last year. So many great players. Our scoring is up. Obviously, you saw the NCAA women's final. LSU scored 102 points, 30 more than the winning team on the men's side in that final. And both Iowa and LSU outscored the men's side. So just the quality of the game's never been better. And we're really excited to tip off our 27th season here in a couple weeks.
Now, Flora, you live in these numbers.
Yes.
ESPN has the college side, has the W side.
Yeah.
What are some of the key demographics, the key viewership data that you're seeing?
Yeah, I think one important note is that this didn't happen overnight. This isn't just like a one-year trend, especially for the WNBA itself. We've seen consistent growth since 2017. So that's fact number one. When we're looking at what's driving growth for women's hoops overall, one, it's exposure. We've increased our programming hours in the last 5 years. So if you build it, they will come. We've increased it by 45%. As Cathy spoke, we've been focusing more of our marketing efforts around the WNBA in particular. So we feel like we're doing a better job in terms of navigating avid fans on our platform. And then our marketing team has spent off-channel dollars in terms of targeting younger and more female fans. So one is just accessibility and availability. 2 is actually having a plan against that. And then the third, which is what I'm focused on, is what are the fan trends? What are the consumer needs that are being fulfilled? And we've done a lot of research with fans, and what we're hearing is women's hoops has this kind of special sauce that their male counterparts sometimes don't have, which is one, Cathy spoke about the actual game itself. And so, what we heard from a lot of fans was the heart and the skill that women players are sort of exhibiting, which is different. And then 2, this approachability factor. And Cathy talked about sort of the ability for players to sort of drive that connection, both for women's college basketball and the WNBA. And what we're hearing from fans is there's that accessibility. I'm able to connect on a deeper level. And so that's all sort of building this amazing circle, right? And we're just beginning. And again, it's not a one-year trend. We've been seeing this growth consistently. And so we're really, really excited about what the next year will bring.
How important has it been in adding ABC windows on the college and the pro level? A couple of years ago, not only were not every game shown in the first round of the NCAA women's tournament, but there were no ABC windows. How important has that addition been?
Yeah, I think it's driven by, again, consumer demand and then showcasing it, right? So you have to be there to sort of pay that off. So I think it's incredibly important. And then also when you look at the growth across women's college basketball and the WNBA, I think having those windows is exposing it to a larger audience that might not have seen it. So for instance, again, like I spoke about, women WNBA that's been growing. If you looked at the composition of the WNBA 5-6 years ago, it looks like any other sport we had on air, which is 70% male, 30% female. WNBA has grown, period. You can't have these type of growth rates. You grow across every single demo. But women, the female audience, that growth has been outpacing male growth. So what you're seeing now in our composition is WNBA now has about a 40-45% composition sometimes in its audience, which is a very attractive audience for us. And again, when we talk to female fans, what the WNBA and women's sports in general has to offer is an inherent advantage in terms of the ability to tap into like our collective pride. I think as women, we sort of embrace the times when we're showcased as these really powerful and strong figures and the ability to compete, right? And so as a brand, even beyond the audience figures, as a brand, to be able to connect to female audiences that way and showcase that positive image, like that's even just beyond the audience numbers, that sort of has value in and of itself. So when you think about the growth of women's sports and the WNBA, don't just look at like the straight growth rates. It means something more. And particularly for women of color, right? So when you look at the audience growth for the WNBA, again, grew for white, Black, Hispanic, but the growth rates for Black and Hispanic audiences have outpaced white audiences. So again, it's showing us this very attractive audience and an ability to connect in ways maybe we haven't been able to before.
And Austin, I'll just add there too, we have a more lifestyle viewer that watches women's sports in general, and certainly the WNBA. So that's why when we are on ABC, ABC grabs in a more lifestyle viewer as well, not only a more female audience, but a more lifestyle viewer who's looking at, that kind of broadcast programming more broadly. And that's why we do so well when we're on ABC. And Flora has all that data around the nature of our fan, the demographic of our fan. But we know, because we see it in our social media, we see it in our media, our broadcasts, where we draw, and we draw on the big networks like ABC.
I want to take a question here from our side panel here. Again, if you have questions, you can type them in here. The question is, with the growth of the WNBA, will league topics be integrated more into various programming across ESPN? Flora, I guess that's a question for you.
So, I'm not the head of content, I'm the head of research, but I think we have been doing a better job. And I know we're increasing our pregame shows for the WNBA. There's obviously still work to do, but I think our goal is to continue increasing coverage because we know that's what fans want.
Yeah, and Austin, I think there is a plan for, Flora, 10 pregame shows across the season, and probably for all of the playoffs. So I think ESPN is doing a great job with adding what we call, I guess it's sports shoulder programming, as lead-ins and lead-outs to the games, because our games fit like great into a 2-hour window. I call us the best 120 minutes in sports, but shoulder programming is important too, because that's where you can tell the stories of the players, the matchups, the rivalries, and build these players into the household names they deserve.
Now, Cathy, you heard all the data points that Flora was able to lay out. Before we send her, a vendor memo request for this next media rights deal, what sort of package are you looking for out there in the market?
Yeah, look, obviously the media landscape is changing enormously. ESPN, Disney has been a great partner of the time. And so what we're trying to do is drive the valuation, get the viewership, the popularity of the game, the quality of the game, the shoulder programming. ESPN also has launched a women's basketball fantasy game for the first time last year, and hopefully we'll capitalize on that again this year. Obviously, we have sports betting, so there's a lot of eyes on the W. And because we skew more female, and if females are influencing almost every consumer purchasing decision in the United States household, that's important to corporate partners as well as media partners. So all of that's going to be really significant metrics leading into the next round of media negotiations. But look, our social media traffic, our fan engagement. I think the over a billion impressions ESPN got on W social content last season we're gonna blow that away this year too. Those are all positives as we think about the traditional metrics, but maybe some of the non-traditional metrics that women's sports deserves in the Valuation Next Media, right? So it's one of the number one things I'm focused on in the transformation of the business model, the economic model for this league. Because as you study the past and men's leagues that were 25, 27 years in, or even 40 to 50 years in, and most of them are 75 to 110 years old now, what put them on the map for player pay, benefits, and a lot of the other things that men get that women don't are the media rights deals. So it's a number one focus of me from an economic business model perspective.
You know, obviously a big game is going to be opening this season, the return of Brittney Griner to the court. I mean, should we be expecting some sort of record number there? It is kind of a late start, 11 p.m. on the East Coast, but it's going to have a big NHL playoff game as a lead-in. Like, what are some of the audience expectations there?
Yeah, obviously, we are so thrilled to have BG return to the court. She's working hard on getting back to playing shape, obviously being out for over a year and certainly being wrongfully detained for 10 months. So she's working her way back to the court. Her return in LA, obviously training camp just began. So we're really excited to welcome her back. And obviously that storyline, as well as our so many other storylines for the league this year. Diana Taurasi's return with Brittney. Obviously, some of the super team narrative that's out there right now. So I think we're going to, kill it across the board from a viewership perspective. We need fans in those seats, and we're going to get that certainly on opening tip weekend. But really looking forward to just getting these players back on the court, playing the craft they love, that they're the best at in the world.
Yeah, I mean, we expected to do better than what we've seen over the past few seasons. I think there's a couple of things at play here. One, momentum, right? So the growth the WNBA has had, continuing that, and then obviously women's college basketball. Obviously, the story around Brittney Griner, what we see from fans overall is that their connection to sport is more and more being driven by their connection to player, especially for younger fans. And so that's both on the field and off the field. In fact, we identify them as story seekers. And so we think sort of, Brittney Griner's story, this sort of momentum that we're seeing overall for the WNBA. And then, as you mentioned, Austin, actually having a live game lead-in, that always is helpful. And so having that sort of larger audience lead into it, there's like the mechanics around programming that help that audience. So we're really excited about it. And we're also excited about the doubleheader that we're going to have on ABC. So it's like building that momentum. And as we think about sustained growth, how are we just sort of building that out throughout that weekend? So it's important for us overall.
I want to take another question here from the audience. Cathy, I mean, could you discuss the new deal that you recently struck with, Ion Network?
Sure. So Scripps just launched Scripps Sports, I think back in the fall. And this partnership will be their first sports partnership, and it will create some appointment viewing for basketball fans. And Friday nights, covering all 15 weeks, all summer. It will expand our media horizon, another sign of our growth. And it's a historic deal for us. It opens up the W to more viewers. I didn't know this, but Ion is the 5th largest network in the country, 79 million paid subscribers, and reaches 103 million homes through a connected TV. So we want to be where sports fans consume live games, and that's ESPN and ABC, and now with Scripps and some of our other partners as well. So as you look at over-the-air broadcast alternatives as cable models are breaking down due to declining subscribers, OTA is the new old, I think, and a national network like Ion gives us that reach and commitment to market our games. So we're thrilled with that, adding to kind of our appointment viewing with ESPN ABC over the weekends.
Flora, I had a question for you. Like, something that has been added in recent years is that Bird and Taurasi alternate telecast around some games. How does that perform in terms of the overall audience for a game compared to something like K-Rod or, something that is another alternate telecast with other sports?
Yeah, so the best way to do those comparisons is comparing that alternative telecast with other championship games. Because if you think about it, any championship game is like high stakes for the viewer, so they're just less likely to go to an alternative feed overall, right? it's too intense. So when you compare that to other alternative casts that are championship games, it actually did better. It was about, I think, a 7.5% share, which is higher than what we typically see, which is a 4.4% share. And so that sort of shows you sort of the value of that alternative cast, but more importantly is its ability to sustain the audience. So what we see with a lot of these alternative casts is less about the exclusive viewership and more about how we're able to sustain people because they're going back and forth, right? That's where a lot of the growth is coming from, is getting them to stay longer during maybe lulls during the game. So we saw that definitely with that alternative cast. And then again, we talked about the special appeal of women's sports to attract female audiences. Those telecasts over-indexed on female audiences compared to the traditional telecast. So a lot of value there.
Now, I have another question here from the audience. Where, I guess, is the separation between ESPN produced content and WNBA league produced content? Cathy, does a lot of league produced content end up on airwaves, or is that primarily on social channels? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, I don't know if you're talking about games versus content. Obviously, short and medium form content, we produce some, our partners produce some, media companies produce some, social content. Games, ESPN, ABC produces our ESPN, ABC games. They're the best. We have some CBS games that we'll produce. Our Commissioner Cup Championship will produce. And our teams produce games primarily for local distribution or distribution through the CBS Sports Network. So it is a little bit of a hodgepodge, but we're getting better and more consistency in the non-ESPN ABC games.
Well, I'm a ratings and media guy, so I can talk about this angle all day, but I do want to cover some other topics related to the league. Cathy, I kind of want to talk about sponsorship a little bit, and I think we have a complete WNBA sponsor roster we can put up here for this question. But how important has the league's change making program been? We're talking about big brands here, AT&T, your former firm, Deloitte, US Bank, Google. Like, what has that program meant?
Yeah, so for those that haven't followed it, back when we signed the collective bargaining agreement in 2020, which was very progressive, had a lot of benefits, a lot higher pay, prize pools, everything, a lot of increases, we said we need to find companies who really share in our values. And we're going to make them an elite category. They're going to be like a coalition. They're going to be a powerful force raising women's sports, because we all know less than 1% of all corporate sponsorship dollars goes towards women's sports. So we have really over the past few years been able to sign. When you can sign a company like Google and Deloitte and AT&T and US Bank and Nike to this category, and more to come. So stay tuned. We're really excited that they've become a force behind not just the WNBA, but women's sports. I'll never forget when we signed Google, the messages I got from the Google execs is how important it was to their own workforce, their talent, to be supporting the diverse women of the WNBA. So that's a big lift. That's an intangible beyond, I think, the partnership. And we have DE&I roundtables with this group, and we're just thrilled with the way it has worked out and grown, and we're going to grow it more. But all of our partners that are shown on this page, we have so many partners stepping up. I don't know if you've been watching the NBA playoffs, but in almost every commercial break, there's a WNBA player in some ad, whether it's State Farm, Michelob Ultra, CarMax, Ruffles, Google. You're just seeing W players like Candace Parker and Super still out there, and Enrique Agumbawale and Mark Cuban in the State Farm, and Jonquel Jones and Asia Wilson and Nneka Ogwumike and the Mick Ultra, and Kelsey Plum and Googles and Diamond DeShields. So, we're just so thrilled that these players are showing up. They're showing up because these partners are stepping up saying, we want these players, to help sell our product, our consumer product, which is, a way for those players also to get personal endorsements, which is really important as well. So thrilled with this whole partnership group, thrilled with what we've done over the past few years in a very challenging environment. But all signs pointing very favorable to building this as a long-term part of our business model.
Now, Flora, I imagine that the numbers that we've seen over the recent years, we talked about some of the superlative brands have to be happy with, the numbers that ESPN is showing them.
We've within the WNBA or even outside of the WNBA for women's sports. Is that the question? Yeah. So we are seeing, rapid interest and rapid growth across the board. I think, there are a few moments in time where you see like these growth trends, right? And so I feel like this is a moment in time where, you want to catch it in the beginning, or not the beginning, but when this growth trend is like on its way up. Because as I said before, as women, like to be able to see that representation and to be the brand that is a part of that story has helped propel that. That's invaluable. And so again, as I mentioned, there's been growth across the board, whether it's been the WNBA, gymnastics, volleyball, and I could spew the like up double digits, up triple digits, but like you have to think about what those numbers mean, right? The reason why we're so focused on ratings is because if that rating's big, or if there's been growth, that's signifying that that was a cultural moment, right? You think about your own life and your own fandom, those cultural moments. For me, it was like when Reggie Miller scored 20 points on the Knicks, right? Those live with you for a long time. And what's happening is women and female athletes are becoming more and more part of those big sports cultural moments, right? So you look at what happened with women's college, basketball. You look at Serena Williams and her last match, right? That was the highest rated tennis match that ESPN has ever had. You look at Sue Bird's last game. Those are cultural moments that as a brand you want to be a part of.
You want to be involved.
Yeah.
And growing up as a Knicks fan, I really appreciate you bringing up Reggie Miller all these years later. Always touching my heart with that one.
Yeah. But, I feel like there's a grittiness to us. You just have to have it, and sort of resilience that has been built in our fandom. Sorry, I don't mean to go off on a tangent.
No, it's fine. It needed to be said. It's that time of year. It's playoff time. The Knicks are still in it, so Reggie Miller is going to be brought up in some context. Cathy, I wanted to talk about investment and finance around the league. You recently had that $75 million infusion. That was last year. What are some of the next areas of growth using those funds for the league?
Yeah, and again, for those that didn't follow, last February we closed on a $75 million funding round with a new whole group of investors, although some of our NBA and WNBA teams chose also to invest. But we brought in outside investors like Secretary Condoleezza Rice. We brought in Michael Dell, the Haslams, the Henrys, who invest also in others, men's sports, and now they're stepping up for women's sports, and a variety of other investors. So we're thrilled to bring in that class. And it shows a confidence in our growth story. We are a growth sports media and entertainment property, and that's why we did it. I came in from a long career in business where I had access to a lot of capital, and I said, we need capital if we're going to be a true growth story. So we're thrilled. We're spending it on fan acquisition, fan engagement, positioning, on media rights, evaluation, bringing in, corporate partnership deals. There's nothing to replace financial capital other than human capital. So when you raise financial capital, you've got to hire human capital to grow. And so we've done that. Obviously, you saw a valuation of our Seattle team at over $150 million post money in their own capital raise. We're actually we blew up, and we're really going to be launching a new kind of digital capability through a new WNBA app this year, transforming our WNBA.com. So many things. We're also paying the players more. We're going to pay over $1.5 million to 11 players this year in off-season marketing deals. So that's what we've been working on all off-season. We're broadening the charter travel program to broaden that to all playoffs and our Commissioner's Cup and our select back-to-back games this year. Last year, we increased the postseason bonus pool by over 50%. So we're trying to find our spots to pay the players more, but also we're trying to grow a sustainable economic model for the future. So in marketing, Austin, that content, digital capabilities, marketing, social, paid advertising spend, just everything related to that. But again, we've been hiring a lot, engineers, product teams, social media, financial, operations, investment people, basketball ops, creating every fan touch point. We want it to be easier to be a fan. So we're spending some of our capital in globalizing the games. We're going to have our first ever preseason game in Canada and Toronto this year. We've sold over 20,000 tickets to that game, and it's a preseason game next Saturday, the 13th. And it's just that'll be a great, kind of litmus test for globalizing our game further in Europe, Asia, Africa, longer term. So I've admired what the NBA has done around their global games. We're going to spend some capital there because we have a huge fan base outside the U.S. but it can grow a lot bigger than it has here to date. So just, really pleased with how the deployment's going. When you raise capital, you don't deploy it all in 1 year. It's a 3 to 5 year deployment, and we're seeing very early positive returns already on that.
That's a good segue to an audience question we have. Like, what are the league's future plans for expansion and potential expansion in Canada?
Yes, I knew that would be a question. So obviously, I made some comments at our presser during right before draft around expansion. This is a really important topic because it is on the nearer horizon. People forget in 20 and 21, we came off 2 tough pandemic years because in 21, remember, most of our arenas didn't host fans till after the Olympic break, and we had to break for the Olympics. So I say we've been doing a lot of the heavy lifting and hard work in this off season. I'd certainly like to see 2 teams come into the league. That opens up 24 more spots, roster spots, and longer term, hopefully more than that. I haven't made it a secret that I've been traveling around listening. We did a huge data analysis of 100 cities, demographics, psychographics, NCAA women's viewership, arenas, Fortune 500 companies, Russell 2000. You need all of that. You need committed owners long term. I've spoken about some of the cities that we were looking at. I visited Portland earlier this year, which I had visited right before the pandemic, and just saw the love for women's basketball there. So I'll be visiting other markets, and we have a lot of interest from a lot of cities. I'd say we've narrowed the 100 down to 20 or so. We have a lot of interest. I'll start visiting some of those other cities this year, some that I'm been throwing out there clearly. I know there's some questions about the Bay Area and San Francisco, and obviously it's been in the press out there. And my view was coming in from Deloitte after 33 years and the Bay Area being such a big, growth driver for our business because technology is driving so much of your economy in the US, and you don't have a team in the Bay Area. Doesn't seem right. So we're definitely looking at that. I'll just throw out some other cities, obviously Toronto, Denver, Austin, Nashville, Charlotte. These are just cities that have shown interest. Not that we're far down the road with any one, but we're going to get there. And I haven't been shy in saying that we wanted to transform the business and economic model so that our existing owners and new owners coming in have a higher chance to be successful longer term. That's what we've been doing. I'm pleased with where we are on that. So expansion is kind of the next thing we're working really hard on.
Flora, I don't know if you've seen this data or have it, but are there any markets that don't have WNBA teams right now that really over-index on the rating side?
I mean, I think there's been growth overall. So I think you typically just want to target the big markets. I haven't taken an in-depth look, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's just consistently growing across the board.
Yeah, but Austin, we do have some data related to that from last season, and it's pretty incredible. There are some markets where where they buy our merch, they watch our games, that are higher than even some of the markets we're in. So that's part of that. We took 25 data sets across 100 cities, and we have that data. It's pretty compelling.
I want to move also on to the new collective bargaining agreement also allows for NBA players to now invest in WNBA teams. We've seen a lot of NBA players invest in NWSL teams or MLS teams. Do you think it's going to really be good for the league to have those players now stick in a sport that they love?
Right. And to clarify for everybody on the phone, so the new NBA collective bargaining agreement, which previously precluded active NBA players from investing with NBA owners, and of course, were owned in part by the NBA. So the new provisions now allow, as Austin just said, this is a huge positive. Over the years, I have personally seen amazing support from NBA players, whether that was from attending games or social media or other ways. And we give out the Kobe and Gigi Bryant Advocacy Award every year now for primarily, we picked a retired NBA player this year, Pau Gasol. Last year it was Chris Paul. Just showing, how supportive they are for the game, the women's basketball game, and the W. You probably saw Tom Brady, was announced as an investor in the Las Vegas Aces. So now an active NBA player can. So I think many NBA players have reached out in the past and were precluded, and now this opens that up. So we're thrilled about that, and there's a lot of interest.
Flora, when we think about WNBA audiences, what are some other sports, male or female, that we should really be thinking about, comparison-wise on TV audience size?
So we don't like to compare our children.
We love all our children.
Yeah,
yes.
But I think when you're looking at the performance of the WNBA, what I would steer clear from is like the actual total viewership. So I don't think that's a fair comparison because, as Cathy stated, the WNBA is relatively young compared to a lot of sports. So it's just like a stock. When a stock first IPOs, you're not looking at total revenue, you're looking at its growth rate. And so that's the way we sort of look at the WNBA. Is its growth rate outpacing its male counterparts, which it is, and is it keeping up with what's going on in the female sports market, which it is, or outpacing? So again, when you're looking at comparables, I would just sometimes steer clear of like total audience side and really focus on that growth rate.
Another question here from the audience. How does the W look at social media to help drive tune-in? Are there specific platforms that the W emphasizes this season, either for tune-in or other content reasons, and why those social platforms in particular?
Yeah, obviously we're on most of the major social platforms. I think we see a lot of success in TikTok because we, look at that younger digital native fan, especially females, youth females who they're using that platform. But, Instagram, we do really well on Instagram, Twitter as well. We're just across the board, Facebook. So we're on every platform, but we look at the data. But driving tune-in is something that, again, is really important. This is a really important year to drive that tune-in with all the storytelling we have. And it's not just, again, driving tune-in to one game. It's driving tune-in to the storytelling that I think ESPN does, that we do on our own social. We have a lot of interest in documentaries and docuseries on the WNBA, like you saw in golf and in F1, et cetera. A lot of interest there as well. There's so many great human interest stories. These players are so socially conscious and community minded, and they really appeal to the average American about their craft and being the best in the world at their craft. So I think, we look at all angles of that. And that's as we think about deployment of capital, not just in social media platforms, but just in that storytelling and short form and medium form content too. Mm-hmm. You don't go to a sport where you don't see somebody, when the camera pans to them looking on their second device or looking on their smartphone and looking at different content, maybe related to a player on the court. Maybe they're Googling and looking something up around that player. Google's been great at showing during our live broadcast with ESPN, because they've done a great job of partnering with ESPN ABC on what's the most searched, terms, how much is it up, and it's usually based on one of our players and their performance on the court that day, just like you see on the men's side. So really important, Austin, for us to be on all the platforms, but certainly look at the ones that perform better for us because of the nature of our fan base.
Something we've written a lot about, Cathy, and obviously this is ancillary to the WNBA, but is whether the NCAA will break off the women's tournament, women's basketball, into its own media rights package. Do you think that will somehow or could be beneficial for women's basketball on the whole?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as you think about media rights in general, I think, the NCAA has some generational players that are going to come into our league over the next few years. The quality of that game. Girls, I was just at a junior NBA, WNBA event earlier today, and I talked about, just in 1 year, we grew the ranks of youth girls basketball from 6.6 to over 7.5 million. So there's more girls playing. There's more girls aspiring to play at the NCAA Division I level. I played back in the 80s and there was no WNBA back then. And now I think kind of the media rights should follow the popularity of the sport, the quality of the game, the storytelling these players. I mean, what a great story with Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark in that final. Shortly after there, I was at the Masters in golf, and everybody was talking about women's basketball in the Final Four. So, well-deserved that viewership and the storytelling and the compelling content. And that's kind of part of our strategy as well, especially as these players come into our league.
Cathy, you've been with the league now as the first commissioner, but you've been with the league since 2019. I just want to see if you could talk about some of the biggest learning lessons you've had now after a few years in the role.
Yeah, probably number one after 30, for those that don't know, I spent 33 years in business in a variety of different industries, financial services, pharma. And I mean, the one thing is sports is, and you guys all know this at SBJ because you write so artfully about it, sports is big business is about relationships. So it's not that different from that perspective. Now, women's sports is really hard because of the underinvestment and undervaluation, but we're making a lot of progress on that. But having been a Division I college athlete, both in lacrosse and basketball for me, the lessons you learn coming out of sports into business, and now I'm back in sports, you can't replace the confidence, it instills in you to compete in what is still a very male-dominated environment in sports as well. But I'm just so pleased, to be the commissioner. This will be my 4th full season because I came in the first year, basically after the All-Star break, and just, then we hit the pandemic year, then we had an Olympic year. So I'm so excited to have this year and all the storytelling we have. But, the lessons really are relationship building was critical with early on with the players to get the CBA done, then to get them to play in a bubble during a time of great social unrest in this country. And the stakeholders are a bit different than what I had at Deloitte here at the W, with the owners and the fans and the media and the our officials, and obviously number one stakeholder, we're very player led. But lots of lessons over my time for a longer conversation. But leadership is about being courageous, growing businesses, doing the right thing despite all the noise out there. And there's a lot of disruption going on. We've got a lot of economic disruption going on with interest rates and supply chain and the banking system, and discretionary dollars that usually go to sports maybe being passed on, but can't be more pleased where brands are stepping up to support the W. And that's a lesson I learned. Continue to be courageous even in downturns, because that's when you have to be your best in your darkest moments, and that's when it'll pay off a few years from now.
Now, I wanted to get to one more audience question, and thank you to everybody. There are so many questions, and I'm sorry I can't get to them all, but Cathy, do you see NIL at the college level as a long-term positive for the WNBA? Because it's going to allow a lot of these players to really build up their brand and then come in and hit the ground running, correct?
Yes, it's a fabulous question, because probably 3.5 years ago when I first came into the job, NIL was just being passed, and I was asked about it, and I go, a little worried it's just going to be another area for women's sports to be undervalued. And guess what? I can report I was wrong. When you looked at the Elite 8 teams last year, not this past year, I haven't looked at the data yet, 4 out of the top 5 NIL earners were women's basketball players. So and they're getting national brands to support them, like a Gatorade or a Nike, and those are our partners too. So it's great that these players can come into our league, actually supplement their income with the WNBA income because they have these NIL deals, but they can bring those over, and those are our national brands and companies that have already stepped up to support women's basketball, the WNBA, and women's sports. So I think it's actually turned out to be a positive. I was a little worried about the undervaluation, but that hasn't actually come to fruition, and it's a great sign and signal. Again, if what Flora said earlier, if you build it, they will come, and this viewership and the personalities and these generational players, because look, you can have a great personality, but not have a great game. We're looking at all of that right now coming out of the NCAA system, and our draft was proof of that. And I think the next 2 years of drafts will be further proof of that. And it's really going to be a great couple years for the handing, the changing of the guard too, with Sue Bird and Sylvia Fowles retiring last year, 2 icons in the game. And you have Diana Taurasi and Candace Parker still leading the charge, but towards the end of their careers. And now you have all these young players that are going to come in, Asia Wilson, Brianna Stewart, but now the rookies like Aaliyah Boston and Ryan Howard from last year, Rookie of the Year. Great changing of the guard story as well. So we'll just keep finding opportunities for players to get their own NIL deals as part of the W, but as well as bring them in from the NCAA.
Well, it's all great stuff. We are looking forward to another great season for the W. I want to be respectful of your time. Flora, Cathy, we really appreciate you taking the time to give your insights and analysis, and we wish both of you the best of luck with this upcoming season.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks, Flora. Appreciate all the support.
Thank you, Austin.
Thank you both.